Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's digital event, Supporting Disabled Colleagues in the Workplace. My name's Claire. I'm one of the event managers at CMI. I'm delighted today to be joined by Vicky Betts and Martin Hillier from Buckinghamshire NHS Trust. I'll be shortly handing over to them to start the webinar today. If you have any questions, please use the chat function and we'll try and answer as many as we can today. The webinar is being recorded and will be sent to you, to all those who registered following the event today, and will also be available on the CMI website and YouTube channel. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Vicky and Martin to begin the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Good morning, everybody. We're very pleased to be with you this morning. I'm Vicky Betts. I'm an occupational therapist and the vocational rehab team lead, working for Community Head Injury Service for Buckinghamshire Healthcare Trust. And I'm joined by Martin Hillier, who is the placement consultant for the team with Community Head Injury Service. And we're here this morning to talk about supporting disabled colleagues in the workplace. A lot of our role is involved with getting people back into the workplace, with work exploration, vocational rehabilitation. So a lot of our role is involved with supporting people with disabilities in employment. So content for this morning. So we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at disability and employment and sort of setting the scene, really, giving you some background information. We're going to talk about the Working Out programme, which is the service that Martin and I both run through the Buckinghamshire Trust. Martin is going to take you through a case study of somebody who he has worked with. And we're going to talk a little bit about some suggestions and ideas about what reasonable adjustments are, how you can talk to somebody about reasonable adjustments. And then particularly, we're going to think about the sort of new way of working, which we are all aware of, that has come since sort of the COVID pandemic, and think about a kind of mixed model, hybrid working, and how that potentially impacts some of the people with disabilities who may be working, and thinking about reasonable adjustments associated with that.
Sorry.
No, I was going to say hand over, Martin.
Yeah, just to kind of set the scene and sort of paint a bit of a picture around disability and employment. There's lots of research on this area, but actually it turns out that people with disabilities are kind of quite disadvantaged when it comes to employment. And if you look at this sort of small table, you can see, when you look at the employment rate for people with disabilities, which is the dark green, compared to the lighter green bar on that first section, you can see that the employment rate is significantly lower for people with disabilities. And the unemployment rate is quite a bit higher for people with disabilities. And the numbers of people with disabilities who are economically inactive is a lot higher as well than non-disabled people. So in regards to disability, years ago, there was a quota system in play that ensured that large organisations employed a percentage of their workforce and made sure that that percentage of people had a disability. But that changed in 1995 when the Disability Discrimination Act came in. and that kind of brought in legislation that made it illegal to discriminate against people with disabilities. That legislation then changed to become the Equality Act in 2010. In the Equality Act, there are a number of what are called protected characteristic groups that are protected by this Act. These include age, gender reassignment, marriage, pregnancy, race, religion, sex, and disability, which we're talking about today. So all of these different groups are protected by the Equality Act. Under the Act, there's a specific definition of what is a disability. And this is a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial and long-term negative effect on your ability to do normal daily activities. And that long-term is kind of a year or longer. So if you've got a broken leg, chances are that will be healed hopefully within a year. So that wouldn't count as long term. But things like autism, epilepsy, dyslexia, and even cancer are covered under that definition of disability. Within the legislation, there's two key points. The first one is to make sure that people are treated equally if they have a disability in a range of situations. So this could be when they're renting a house, when they're undertaking a course, when they're at school, when they're receiving goods or services, and in employment. And one of the key points for me is that the Equality Act brings in something called reasonable adjustments. And as an employer, we are bound by the Act to make reasonable adjustments to ensure that our employees who may have a disability can carry out their roles to the best of their ability. So we're looking to not disadvantage anybody because they have a disability. And just an interesting point, we've put this slide in just to demonstrate a little bit about how difficult it can be for people with disabilities to find work. So Vicky and I both work in Buckinghamshire in the UK. Within Buckinghamshire, which is a fairly small county, there are 15 services that support people with disabilities to find work. So kind of just put a little bit of details on there, and there's a good website called Bucks Workability that details all of these different organizations if you fancy having a look at that. But the reason I wanted to highlight this is if you look at the other protected characteristics, there's probably one, if that, service within Buckinghamshire that helps those protected characteristic groups, yet there are 15 that help people with disabilities. And for me, that really highlights the struggles that people with disabilities can have just finding work. So that's sort of setting a bit of background around disability and employment. Vicky's now going to talk to you a bit about our service.
Thank you, Martin. So the service we work for, as I said, is the Community Head Injury Service based in Aylesbury. And we provide assessment and rehabilitation for adults who have had some form of traumatic brain injury. So it can be things such as a stroke, subarachnoid hemorrhage. Some people who come to us may have had a brain tumour. Some people have had some accident, so they've had a traumatic brain injury through that route. We're a county-wide service. We are based in the centre of Aylesbury, and we provide intervention at the centre, also in the community. So we have lots of community activities that we go to, or if necessary, in the workplace. We are funded by Buckinghamshire Community Healthcare NHS Trust. And I think it's important to add that we are one of only a very small number of vocational services that you can access through the NHS. We're quite unique. And I think at the moment, accessing this type of service and vocational support through the NHS can be a little bit of a postcode lottery. So it's just important to emphasise that. We are a specialist service. So we have two teams. We have a rehabilitation team, and they really focus on kind of core brain injury rehabilitation. So people who are sometimes perhaps at an earlier stage and have been an inpatient and have come through perhaps some outpatient rehabilitation and are needing to continue that. We look at providing individual, group therapy, neuropsychological assessment, and we have a brain injury specialist practitioner that can work with patients and their family. Martin and myself are in the working out team, so a separate team, and we are very much focused on supporting people to return or to find new employment. So we look very much at work assessments, work preparation. Martin is very much involved in job seeking support and looking at possibilities of sort of employment within that area. Work trials, supported work placements, and very much something that I think is essential, which is job retention services. So people that come to us who may still have a job open to them and are off sick, we then support them and work with them and their employer and other agencies like occupational health to try and retain that post and get them back into the workplace. So, as I've said before, we look at assessing somebody's work situation and work skills, and then we look at a program of vocational rehabilitation. We have group sessions, we have a work preparation group, a job club. We look at the potential impacts of somebody's head injury, the type of strategies that they might use and adjustments that might be needed to support them in the workplace. We spend time looking at work preparation. We have lots of community vocational rehabilitation activities. We provide groups that we run, gardening groups at Stoke Mandeville Hospital and also up at a National Trust property. There's also a book factory in Milton Keynes that people attend. So lots of opportunity for work practicing those type of activities and looking at how the type of difficulties you might have could impact you in the workplace. Job search support, work placements, and very much individual support and guidance in the workplace. So thinking about the type of difficulties someone who has had a head injury might have, and I think it's fair to say that nobody we work with has sort of the same difficulties. Everybody is unique and individual, and it can be a real combination of cognitive, communication, physical difficulties. They're often emotional and behavioural changes, and in the experience I've had, those can be some of the most difficult barriers for somebody going back to a job if they have changes in their personality and their behaviour. Fatigue is often a huge problem, and when we say fatigue, it's very different to, I think, when we all experience fatigue and we can all feel tired, but fatigue following brain injury is something very, very different and something that very often lasts a long time following the injury, and something that people often have to adjust to on a long-term basis. It's very difficult to think about timescales for someone who's had a brain injury. So talking to an employer, and that's often something an employer needs and wants, is a bit of an idea of how long this process is going to take. When can they expect someone to return to work? And that can be very difficult to ascertain. Very often people are going to need adjustments to the type of role that they're either looking for or that they may have worked in before, or they may be looking for something completely different. It may not be possible to go back to the role that they would have done before. And it's not just about getting a job, it's about sustaining that job. So it's about being effective and sustaining that on a long-term basis. And then obviously with any work role and with any sort of employment, it's thinking about impact on their family, on the people that they support, and obviously the financial impact that may have. So the types of intervention, we look at an assessment of their brain injury, an assessment of their work situation, their work skills, their previous experience, psychological assessment, cognitive rehabilitation, As I said, we have a work preparation group, job club. Martin spends lots of time working with people, looking at their CV and potential jobs that they might be interested in, and what that job description might be and what they might be expected to do. A lot of return to work planning, so thinking about what a phased return to work might look like with their employer, with occupational health and HR. Thinking about adjustments, type of adjustments, advising on those, looking at equipment that might be supporting that person, and thinking really about advising on placements and trials that may help someone try some of those things out before they commit to a particular role or a particular job. And the last slide before I hand back over to Martin, it's just some points really that I think are quite important to think about, and particularly why vocational rehabilitation is so important, and why Martin and myself are very passionate about the importance of vocational support. And an estimate is that by 2030, 1 in 3 of people of working age, so 1 in 3 of all of us, will have a long-term health condition that they are managing whilst they work. I think previously, the feeling was that quite often if you have a long-term health condition, you may be looking at stepping away from work. But I think now the focus is very much that you will remain in work, or if you're able to, and that you will manage that condition as you progress. We're very, very passionate that job retention, vocational support should start in the NHS. As I said before, we are a specialist service. It's not a common intervention that's offered in the NHS. But I really feel that to help support people in the right way, you must integrate their rehabilitation to actually what their work role is. What type of function do they need to get back to? So we really feel that that's a very important part. Your chances of returning to work following a long-term illness or prolonged absence is generally quite poor. The longer you're off from work, the less chance you have. Very often, if we're working with people who've been out of the workplace for a period of 12 to 18 months, statistically, their chances of going back are between 1% and 5%. So you're already up against a lot of barriers to returning to employment. Presenteeism is very important to consider. There are many people at work who don't feel like they are coping, who don't feel like they're managing, who feel like they need some help, or who feel like they are about to go off sick because they can't cope with a condition that they have and the workplace. So it's very important to look at people who may need that sort of support. And resilience, it's become a real passion for myself and I think for our team, that resilience to stay in your work role is essential, and long-term resilience and looking at what can help make you resilient is absolutely vital. Okay, thank you.
So I'm gonna just talk you through an example of the support we've given one of our clients, just so you can see I guess what their journey was like and how we suggested some reasonable adjustments for them. So we had a lady who was referred to us. She was aged 48. She fell out of her loft and had a brain injury. As a result of that fall, I think she was left in the house for a number of days before someone discovered her, because she lived on her own. At the time of her injury, she was working full-time as a corporate solicitor, so in quite a kind of high-flying role. So when she came to us, we assessed what she found difficult. She had problems with fatigue. So as Vicky said before, fatigue for someone with a brain injury, it's almost like their brain gets overworked and goes into shutdown mode. So it's not just like feeling tired from a late night. She had difficulties with her attention, focusing on things, problems with her memory, particularly visually, and difficulties with the speed that she processed information. So if you think about some of these difficulties as a solicitor, they're probably going to impact on you in your role. So we supported her to go back into her role. We made, and she made her colleagues aware of some of the difficulties that she had, and they knew of her injury because she had time off work to recover. So it wasn't like she had to think about, well, what am I going to say? Will I mention something or won't I mention something? And we were involved with making some recommended reasonable adjustments to her employer. So here's a short extract from the letter that we wrote to the employer. And you can see with the bullet points some of the reasonable adjustments that we suggested. So the first one is thinking about how she got into work. And seeing if it might be possible for her to get a taxi or a different form of transport into work, so she didn't have to worry about the journey, which could take a bit of the load off her. We also, on the second bullet point, talked about what we would call a graded or phased return. So she started going back to work on a Tuesday and a Thursday, just from 10 till 2, with a plan to build those hours up. We also talked about moving her desk from a busy office to a quiet corner or a side office, so that would help with her attention. And we also highlighted that she may require extra breaks just to keep on top of things. We then mentioned to the employer that it may take her slightly long to complete tasks, and also that if something was particularly complex, having the opportunity to have a colleague just cast their gaze over what she was working on to check there were no major mistakes. So these were the core reasonable adjustments that we suggested for her when she tried to go back to her work as a corporate solicitor. So she tried to do this 3 separate occasions, and unfortunately each time it just didn't work out. And the main reason for this was her fatigue. She would get so tired and couldn't put the hours in that she needed to. So she decided with a heavy heart to walk away from her role and her career that she'd worked really hard to kind of be successful in, and find a brand new job. So she came back to us at this point and attended a range of different groups with us. And we had a lot of one-to-one sessions around finding a new job. And she started looking for part-time admin work. And she spent at least 6 months looking for this, which was quite traumatic for her because she was very worried about bringing some money in, keeping her home, and you know, the financial challenges of not working. But she was also quite anxious about what to say about her disability, and the fact that if she said she had a head injury on her applications, would that preclude her from being offered an interview? So for 6 months, she was applying for roles and got nowhere. She was then invited for an interview with the Ministry of Defence, and she got that role, which was fantastic. So at first interview, she was really successful, and it was getting face to face with the employer that gave her the opportunity to really sell herself. So she told the Ministry of Defence about her head injury and disability. And again, we were involved in making some suggestions for reasonable adjustments. Just before lockdown, she was promoted into a new role, but she then had to have an operation on her hip and wasn't due to go back until we were in lockdown. So during lockdown, she started back in this new role, but it was home working. And actually, that turned out to be really beneficial for her because it meant she was less fatigued. The journey she had to make to work wasn't there anymore. So she could get up, get ready, and be working and take away the journey, which made her more tired. The employer bought her a second work chair so that she had an adapted chair at work. And they picked up on the fact that she would need one if she was working from home, got her the same chair, so now she had 2, and they've allowed her to work flexibly when she is working from home. So despite not being able to go back to her role, she's now really enjoying her new job and her new direction. She has a sense of pride, a sense of being able to give back, put into the community, and she's got a real sense of worth, and I think she's incredibly proud of the fact that she works for the MOD as well. So these are the examples of the adjustments that we suggested for her new job. So they're slightly different. What we suggested in the new role was looking at having flexible breaks, trying to support her to develop a new routine, and a routine that could kind of give her structure so that she knew what she was doing and when, and almost give her the opportunity to carry out more complex tasks first thing in the morning when she's less tired. Also, it's to give her the opportunity to take notes and to sometimes back up what she's being asked to do with maybe an email, just to kind of help her memory wise, and to try to avoid interrupting her when she's in the middle of doing something. And often these adjustments don't have to be particularly huge or cost a lot of money. They can just be slight tweaks to how somebody works. So we thought it would be really interesting to give you an idea as to sort of how we've worked with somebody and some of the actual real life adjustments that we've suggested for one of our clients. What we wanted to go on and talk about now was a bit more about reasonable adjustments and the workplace. So we're planning to kind of talk a bit about the workplace culture around disability, actual reasonable adjustments, highlight a few tools or things like that you might want to have a think about, and also to talk a little bit about the new ways of working. And I think, Vicky, if there's any points you want to bring in as we're going through this, feel free.
Thank you.
So I think one of the first things to as a manager to try and think about is kind of trying to develop a positive culture around disability. And now I've found a really nice quote, which is, it's the repetition of affirmations that leads to belief. And once that belief becomes a deep conviction, things begin to happen. That was Muhammad Ali who said that. And I think that for me, it really relates to kind of trying to build a positive workplace culture around disability. And it's about having those positive conversations about disability that can gradually start to move things forward. There is still a stigma about disability. Lots of people are really scared, especially if they have a hidden disability, to mention that they've got it. And I think a lot of the focus is on the dis and not the ability. When you look at the word disability, lots of people focus on what you can't do rather than what you can do. And I think there's potentially a few different ways that we can try to look to sort of adjust and build a positive culture in the teams and organizations that we manage in. And I think one of the first things is to try and enable our staff and our colleagues to feel comfortable to talk about their disability or to disclose about their disability. And that's a key word, disclose, for people who have hidden disabilities. So that could be a brain injury, or it could be dyslexia, or it could be something like epilepsy. People aren't bound by law to mention that necessarily. So some of the ways that we can try and make people feel comfortable about talking and disclosing about their disability is when you advertise a role. This is a good opportunity to maybe include something in your advert to say how you approach and how you think about disability, to mention that you have a positive approach, which can then encourage people to think, oh, well, this organization isn't going to discriminate against me. They're going to give me the opportunity to kind of compete on a level playing field with everybody else. There's something called Disability Confident. This is run by the Department of Work and Pensions, and it's a bit like a watermark, if you like, that organisations can sign up to say, we approach disability in a positive way. We understand some of the difficulties that people have, and we are looking to try and make sure that we're giving people opportunity and level playing fields. It's free to sign up to this, and I think there's 3 different levels of it. I think there's committed, employer, and leader, and I've put the link to the Disability Confident website up on the slide. So if you want to explore that, that can give you a bit better understanding as to how that works. Another thing to help people feel more comfortable to talk about their disability is to offer guaranteed interviews to people who apply. And this is often done when somebody meets the minimum criteria for a role. And lots of organisations do this already. And I think it's really positive that they do this. And I think one of the things that as a disability confident employer you would agree to is to offer these guaranteed interviews. They are a really positive thing, but the problem with them is that organizations will often sign up to it, and people in HR or senior executives will be, it's great, we're offering guaranteed interviews, this is awesome. But not everybody who's recruiting understands how the guaranteed interview process works, or realizes that they should even offer a guaranteed interview. So for me, one of the real core things is to make sure that all your recruiting managers, if you do offer guaranteed interviews, are understanding what this means, signed up to it, and carrying this out. And I've come across organizations who offer them, but then when people are applying, they don't get interviews, and there's nothing more demoralizing for somebody who's kind of stood up and said, okay, I've got a disability, but I'd like a guaranteed interview, and then they don't get that guaranteed interview. So other ways to kind of adjust the culture and encourage people to feel more comfortable about disclosing, to offer disability awareness training to all staff. I think in our organisation we offer this as a kind of mandatory piece of training. Is that right, Vicky?
Yes, we do. Yeah.
If not, we better have a word with someone, because we should be.
We do.
Yeah, and that's a really good way of helping, everybody in an organization understand. And it might be that different types of training work better for different levels of staff. So, managers may need something that maybe covers guaranteed interviews, whereas people in non-managerial roles maybe don't need that. Something that we offer in our organisation is a disability staff network. This is the opportunity for colleagues to get together to talk and share experiences, share what's working, share what's not working, and kind of that network is provided with the opportunity to kind of feed into our organisation at a director level. So if there's something wrong, we can flag it straight up to the top of the organisation, which will hopefully mean that it gets looked at. And lots of organisations do staff networks. And also they offer mentoring schemes as well, whereby people can be, if they disclose about their disability, be offered, we'll give you a mentor to help you focus on developing your career. So it's kind of like almost incentivizing. If you tell us you have a disability, we will look after you and we'll give you extra opportunity to ensure that we're giving you the best opportunities. And sharing lived experience, that's also a real good way of kind of getting people to think more positively about disability and feel comfortable about it and around it. We're just going to mention a little bit about what is a reasonable adjustment. An ACAS website has a nice definition of it, which is a reasonable adjustment is a change to remove or reduce the effect of an employee's disability so they can do their job. A job applicant's disability when applying for a job. The problem with this, and that big grey bar is demonstrating that reasonable is a massive grey area. What was reasonable for me will probably differ to Vicky and probably differ to all of you. as far as I'm concerned, it would be reasonable to knock down a whole building and rebuild it brick by brick to put a lift in. And you're probably all sat there thinking, oh gosh, no, that's not reasonable. And it differs from one person to another. And I think that's a bit of a challenge sometimes, is working out, well, what actually is reasonable.
And I would say, Martin, I think that's where our role can be quite helpful, because it's bringing those two things together and saying, well, actually, for the individual, what's reasonable, but for the employer and for the role, what's reasonable, and how do we bridge that gap and bring that together? And sometimes it is helpful to have somebody else as part of that negotiation and discussion.
Yeah, it's like that third party, isn't it, kind of thing. Yeah. So in regards to kind of putting reasonable adjustments in place and promoting them, this is part of all of our duties, I feel, as employers, and it kind of fits in to enabling our staff and our colleagues to be able to do their jobs to the best of their capability. And as employers and managers, that's the kind of thing that we want. We want our staff and our colleagues to be performing at their best, because then they will be more productive, they will meet their objectives, and that's kind of what we're aiming for. So by putting reasonable adjustments in place, we're kind of enabling people to do their best. So a few points in and around reasonable adjustments. For me, if you've got an employee who has a disability, or they've disclosed they've got it, or it's a visual one, and you know that they have it, they're probably going to be the leading expert in the world in themselves, and they're probably going to be the best person to understand what they're going to need to help. I've come across situations where occupational health departments have said, oh, this person will need this and this, but actually that person's like, well, I'm not going to need any of that, that's not going to help me at all. So it's very much sort of, I would encourage to try to speak to individuals, have open discussions, let them know that you want to help them, rather than kind of put barriers in place. It's about breaking down barriers for them. Having a system in place like occupational health is normally really positive. That they a lot of people think when they kind of first come to us, our occupational health are there just to kind of see if I can do the job and then get rid of me if I can't. But actually, occupational health's role is to try and facilitate reasonable adjustments and offer positive solutions. Having open discussions with staff about what will help them to do their job, I think is really important. There's something called Access to Work, which is again a Department of Work and Pensions scheme. Access to Work will be able to be contacted by your member of staff. As a manager or an employer, we can't contact them. The member of staff needs to contact them and say, I have a disability and I need some help with either an assessment from Access to Work to see what reasonable adjustments might be able to help them, or funding to help with reasonable adjustments. The funding side of things is complex, but Access to Work can provide money to support people to be able to have reasonable adjustments to help them in their role. A really nice example is a guy we work with who uses an electric scooter. They helped fund a scooter for him at work because he was using his own to travel around a park and pick up litter. They've also funded a taxi for him to get to work so that he doesn't have to drive his own scooter to work and back. I've known Access to Work fund bits of computer equipment, desks, chairs, and even coaches who can come in and work alongside someone.
And I think that type of intervention from Access to Work, it is really important, particularly for people who have quite hidden difficulties. So it may be that we have lots of clients who have problems with cognitive difficulties, memory and concentration and those sorts of things. And I think access to work are much more geared up now than perhaps previously to support people with other types of difficulties. And I know one client recently is looking at being supported by a program, a kind of mind mapping program, to help them with some of their kind of planning and organization issues. So some of the other types of issues that people have, not just the physical side, access to work, are really geared up to try and support.
Yeah, it can take a little while for an application to go through. So encouraging people to get in touch as soon as possible is a good idea. Another thing that a lot of our clients say they find difficult is having to keep retelling their story time and time again to everybody that they encounter at work or in other places. Systems like disability passports can really help people not have to tell their story and paint a clear picture as to what support they might need. And these are being talked more and more about. This is an example of a disability passport designed by the TUC. There's ones in the NHS that I've seen as well. And I've got some links, I think, shared somewhere that you can maybe go on to help direct you to them, or you can Google them. They're fairly easy to find online. This might give you some sort of ideas as to sort of how these can be used. We also use this. It's probably a little bit difficult to read the writing, but this is something we will make up for our clients. That covers some of the difficulties they have. So in this case, we're talking about memory difficulties. And what we do down this side is we say, what adjustments can the employer make for me? And then down this side, we're saying, what strategies do I need to remember? So we will design one of these with our client, and they can take this with them. They could use it as a prompt for themselves or a memory aid, or they can hand it over to their manager or HR or occupational health, and something about their difficulties and adjustments is then on file, if you like, and won't be forgotten. So here's some links to a couple of nice documents on reasonable adjustments, and a couple of examples of disability passports. So hopefully they'll be available in the slides from today. There is support that as employers you can access to help you kind of think about disability. The Department of Work and Pensions have disability employment advisors based in nearly all job centres. If you wanted to get some advice and support and help, they're a really good person to speak to. The Department of Work and Pensions also have work psychologists who can come out and help in more difficult to manage situations. And as we mentioned, there's Access to Work. There's the Business Disability Forum, who are an organisation that brings employers and organisations together in the UK, that focuses on kind of supporting each other, sharing of practice, generating ideas. And then there'll be lots of local organisations who support people with disabilities into work, who may be able to give you advice, guidance, or even have candidates that they could put forward to vacancies that you may have. So just to whiz through a few examples of reasonable adjustments. It could be that you consider physical adaptations like a ramp, a chair, a different screen, changing your lighting, or a quiet workspace. There are lots of IT and technology based adaptations and adjustments that we can consider. There's a piece of software called Dragon that's like a dictation program that's really helpful for those who have dyslexia. Things like roller mouses instead of a regular mouse. Bits of kit that can magnify the screen or magnify bits of paperwork. Something called job carving is something that you could consider, which is adapting somebody's actual role so that you can focus on their strengths and distribute tasks that are more difficult to colleagues, and that person can then pick up some of the colleagues' tasks that fall within their area of strength. You can think about adapting working patterns, earlier starts, later starts, splitting up a lunch break into bite-sized chunks, which is another way of trying to do things. This could be like backing up a verbal instruction with an email, using to-do lists or whiteboards. There's the whole work from home, not work from home thing. But I think trying to be flexible is a really important thing. Thinking about, have we got policies that we can adapt and adjust to enable someone to have an adjustment? So you may have a policy that you can't use your phone on the work floor, but actually someone may use their phone to help them remember things by taking pictures. So if you say you can use your phone, that might help. And there are things like phased returns to work and long-term phased returns, so not just 4 weeks or 6 weeks, and maybe switching to part-time hours. But I think for me, the key thing is try not to be afraid to speak to your staff about what they would need and be creative. There are many sort of things that you could try adopting. So some thoughts around the kind of changes that the COVID pandemic have kind of brought, and I think they kind of tie in a lot with some of the points that we've covered already around reasonable adjustment. And it's to try to think about having conversations with staff who have a disability or have disclosed a disability, and have open and honest discussions with them, and generate a culture where that happens. And before you change anything, have that conversation with them. People need adjustments if they're working from home, just as much as if they're working from offices. So a screen, a chair. Think about how maybe remote meetings could impact on someone. Think, would a certain work setting work better for an individual, or a blended approach? If they're having a blended approach, how might that impact on say the fatigue if they get tired? I know in our organisation, we changed our sickness policy during the pandemic, and this had a big impact on some of the members of our disabled staff network, and made it actually harder for them to report sickness and absence. And it wasn't until the staff network said, oh, this is having a negative impact, did the organisation then come back and look at that. And also having a conversation with people who've had COVID, thinking about phased returns, and do they have long COVID, and how might that impact them? That's another consideration. And that kind of brings us to the end of the kind of points that, of any further help, you're more than welcome to contact us. There are email addresses, and our landline, but only ask for Vicky if it's a difficult question, because I don't want to answer the difficult ones. I think we've got a few questions. Yeah, no, but it's a pleasure, Vicky.
Brilliant. Thanks both so much. That's really, really insightful. And there's, I don't know if you've seen the chat, there's so many comments and conversations going on there. It's really great to see. So we have had a lot of questions come through, both pre-submitted when people booked and today. So obviously, unfortunately, we can't get through them all. So I'll just start with a few. One of them that's just jumped out at me is, so what if an employee does not disclose their disability, for example, a mental health condition, until after their probationary period has passed?
That's one of those questions that Vicky's going to answer.
Thanks, Martin. So it's very difficult, because officially, if you don't disclose your condition, where disclosed, then in the first instance, your employer, your manager is not able to support you, but also then they don't have a responsibility to support you. So it's a very difficult situation. And I think lots of our clients always sort of ask us and say, what's the benefit of disclosing should I disclose about a health condition? Should I discuss this with my manager? And it's a very information. But if you don't disclose, your manager isn't obliged to support you. You are then are not in a position where you can have those discussions with your manager. So it's a very difficult situation if you don't disclose. Would you agree, Martin?
Yeah, definitely. And we try to encourage everybody to think very carefully about, disclosing.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. From your experience, are there specific types of organisations or sectors that lead the way on inclusive workplaces for disabled people? It seems likely that large organisations in the public sector would be role models, but is this the case? You're going to give that one to Vicky.
If I start, Martin, I know, and we may have a controversial answer to this, but no, my experience over the last sort of 25 years working with employers is that, and I've worked with some huge employers and really big companies and some very, very small employers. And from my experience, I've always found that it's not the size of the company, it's not the policies necessarily that they have in place, it's the manager that makes the difference. And it's the manager's ability and skill to support somebody and to listen and to open up that conversation and to understand the health implications and the adjustments that might be needed that's important. I've worked with some enormous companies that have lots of policies, lots of systems in place, but actually have a very poor outcome in terms of supporting people with disabilities, be that physical or mental health disabilities. And I've had some tiny employers that have had fantastic results and have offered fantastic support. So I don't necessarily think it's the size of the organisation that is relevant. It's the individual manager. I don't know what your thoughts are, Martin.
Definitely, it all comes down to the individual. I've worked with some managers who have been more than happy to bend over backwards for people, and I remember one specific example where I rang up an employer to ask about a vacancy they had, and their reply was, "Oh, we've already got one of those. I don't want another one." And it just really comes down to the individual manager. Public sector, working for the public sector, I think it would be nice if the public sector did a little bit more, and I think that's something that the public sector is trying to improve. But for many years, when you speak to the professionals who support people with disabilities into work, a lot of them would say the public sector is the hardest one to get people jobs in.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that the COVID pandemic has meant that there is going to be and has started to be significant change, particularly in the NHS, with supporting people with mental health difficulties, because obviously there's a large number now of NHS staff who are going to be struggling with the implications of the pandemic. And I think I've certainly noticed in the last sort of 4 to 6 weeks, new disability training that's coming out around sort of mental health difficulties, and have managers having conversations with their staff around mental health issues, having health and well-being check-ins regularly. So I think it is changing, but yeah, I certainly would agree with Martin. I think that the public sector can be one of the most difficult.
Brilliant, thank you. A good question that quite a few people asked actually when they booked to attend is, how do we get more disabled leaders into organisations?
I think for me, it's about giving people opportunities to develop, having a positive culture, and supporting people to kind of make the best of their skills, and I think if you've got a positive culture where people aren't afraid to have discussions around disability, to share their experiences, then that goes a long way to encourage colleagues to be open. And when you've got that kind of culture, you attract more people. You know, people who have various different disabilities do talk about employers, and they do say, oh, well, this organization I know is a good one. There are some organizations I know people will say, I know this is a good organization. Why don't you apply to work for them? And that would work for leaders all the way down to people working in kind of the lower roles as well.
And my feeling is that having a disability network, as Martin has mentioned before, and actually Martin runs the disability network for our trust, and having that, and I think it's the ability network that we have in Buckinghamshire NHS Trust, and I think having those networks and that not only support but that networking as well, and that, as Martin said, that sort of integration with the sort of higher management levels within the trust is really, really important.
And I think as well, it's encouraging those higher level managers to kind of say, well, yes, I have a disability too. The chair of our NHS Trust is a member of our network, and she's quite open about the disability that she has. And I think that encourages everyone at all levels to think more positively.
Brilliant, thank you. I think this is probably going to be the last question. We've had so many through, but someone that's asking, in developing a framework for hybrid and flexible working, what are the key considerations for disabled colleagues? And also, what collaborations tool can you recommend? So 2 questions in one there.
And I think that the key thing for me, if you're developing a framework, is communication. Speak to your employees or your colleagues who have disabilities and find out what they need and what would work for them, rather than thinking, right, this is what they're going to need, and rolling something out. It's about having those communication channels, just like with so many things, you know, talking about something, engaging with the people that it's going to impact.
It's recognizing. Sorry, Martin, I was going to say it's as you said before, it's recognizing that actually the individual is often the expert, and to allow them to have that information sharing of the condition, of the types of adjustments that they feel might be beneficial.
Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you both of you. So like I say, the slides and the resources and further information will be sent out to everybody that registered to attend the session. So thank you so much, Vicky and Martin, for today, for your insights and expertise. It's definitely been an excellent topic to discuss. If you are a member of CMI already, don't forget to log into Management Direct, where you can access thousands of practical development resources and much more. If you're not yet a member of CMI, join our community via the link in the chat on here, so you can gain full access to Management Direct and sign up to our free newsletter. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thank you.